I'm moving out tonight. I've met someone who truly appreciates me." My husband's words pierced through the joyful chatter at our daughter's baby shower. Silence fell over the room like a heavy curtain. From the corner, a young woman, maybe 30 years old, awkwardly raised her glass of mimosa and gave a small wave. Our friends and family sat frozen, their expressions ranging from shock to pity to secondhand embarrassment. My daughter, Jennifer, 7 months pregnant with our first grandchild, looked up from the tiny pair of booties she'd just unwrapped. Her face crumpled, and I instinctively placed my hand on her shoulder. "I'm happy you found your path," I said to my husband of 38 years, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. I squeezed Jennifer's shoulder gently, whispered, "I'll call you later," and walked out of the community center in Columbus, Ohio, with my head held high. The May sunshine felt warm against my face as I stepped outside, a stark contrast to the cold reality that had just unfolded. I am Teresa Callahan, 61 years old, a retired school librarian who just watched my marriage publicly implode. But I wasn't as devastated as everyone in that room might have assumed, because I'd known for months. I slid into my car, a sleek new Lexus that Gregory had complained was too extravagant for a retiree, and pulled out my phone. With trembling fingers, anger, not sadness, I sent a text message with a secure link and the simple words, "You might want to check this when you have a moment." As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in my rearview mirror to see Gregory bursting out of the building, his face flushed as he fumbled with his phone. I knew exactly what he was seeing. Documentation of every financial move I'd methodically made over the past 3 months. The vacation house in Sandusky now solely in my name. Our joint savings, carefully and legally redistributed. The retirement accounts, protected under a trust my lawyer had assured me was airtight. Years ago, this would have been unimaginable. I was the woman who had to ask permission to buy a new dress, who handed over my teacher's paycheck for better management, who believed my husband when he said that financial matters were too complicated for me to understand. But people can change, people can learn, people can prepare. My phone began to ring. Gregory's name flashed on the screen. I declined the call and turned onto the highway, heading toward the luxury apartment I'd secretly leased last month. I first noticed something was wrong last Christmas. We were hosting our traditional family dinner. Gregory, myself, Jennifer, and her husband Thomas, our son William, who had flown in from Portland, and a handful of close friends. I was in the kitchen preparing dessert when Gregory's phone, left carelessly on the counter, lit up with a message. "Missing you already. Last night was perfect." The sender's name was Angela B. I remember setting down the knife I was using to slice apple pie, wiping my hands on my apron, and taking a deep breath. After 37 years of marriage, you develop an intuition. This wasn't a colleague. This wasn't innocent. This was something else entirely. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I began to pay attention. Gregory, once predictable in his routines, had become erratic. Monthly fishing trips extended to every weekend. Late nights at the office became more frequent, despite his supposed preparation for retirement from the investment firm where he'd worked for 3 decades. Credit card statements showed dinner charges at restaurants too fancy for business meetings, always for exactly 2 people. "You seem distracted lately," he said to me one evening in February, not looking up from his newspaper. "Is everything all right?" I almost laughed at the irony. "Just thinking about our future," I replied honestly. Gregory nodded absently. "Don't worry about that. I've got everything under control." That was his favorite phrase. "I've got everything under control." He'd said it when we bought our first home, when we invested in his company's stock options, when we made decisions about our children's education. For decades, I believed him. I trusted him to handle our finances because he was the expert, the successful investment advisor who managed millions for clients. What did I know about money? I was just a school librarian who loved books and children. But watching him pretend to read that newspaper while his mind was clearly elsewhere, I realized something important. Gregory might be having an affair, but his real betrayal had been keeping me financially ignorant for decades. That was a power imbalance I could no longer accept. The very next day, I made an appointment with Valerie Peterson, a financial advisor recommended by my friend Dorothy, who had navigated her own difficult divorce years earlier. Valerie listened carefully as I explained my suspicions and my situation. "You've been married how long?" she asked, reviewing the paperwork I'd brought. 38 years in June. "And in all that time, you've never had your own accounts?" I shook my head, feeling a flush of embarrassment. Gregory always said it was more efficient to manage everything together. "Mrs. Callahan, you need a crash course in taking control of your financial life," Valerie had said, pushing her glasses up on her nose. "And you need to move quickly, but carefully." The next month was a blur of appointments, paperwork, and secret financial maneuvers. I met with a lawyer, Elizabeth Winters, who specialized in high-asset divorces. I gathered documents, made copies, and cataloged every asset we owned. I learned that Ohio is an equitable distribution state, meaning that in a divorce, marital property would be divided fairly, though not necessarily equally. "You've contributed to this marriage for nearly 4 decades, Elizabeth explained. "As a teacher, you helped put food on the table while raising your children. You have every right to an equal share." What shocked me was discovering exactly what that share encompassed. Gregory had accumulated significantly more wealth than I'd realized. Beyond our primary residence and vacation home, there were investment properties I hadn't known about, stock portfolios, and retirement accounts with balances that made my eyes widen. "He kept all this from me?" I asked, stunned as I looked at the statement totals. "Financial concealment is unfortunately common," Elizabeth said gently. "But knowledge is power, and now you have both." Armed with this new understanding, I followed my legal team's advice meticulously. I opened my own bank accounts. I began transferring funds from our joint accounts, not all at once, which could look vindictive, but gradually and strategically. I updated beneficiary designations on insurance policies. I secured copies of tax returns, investment statements, and property deeds. And most satisfyingly, I transferred our vacation property in Sandusky, a lakefront cottage that had been my dream home for retirement, into my name alone, a move that was perfectly legal given how the property had been titled. Throughout this process, I maintained a facade of normalcy at home. I prepared Gregory's favorite meals, listened to his stories about work, and nodded sympathetically when he complained about being too busy for our usual Sunday dinners with the kids. I even feigned disappointment when he announced another weekend fishing trip, this time with my full knowledge that fishing meant a boutique hotel in Cincinnati with Angela B. Meanwhile, Jennifer's pregnancy progressed, and she asked if I would help host her baby shower. I threw myself into the planning, grateful for the distraction. We chose a spring garden theme, coordinated games and decorations, and sent invitations to family and friends. Gregory seemed pleased that I was occupied, making it easier for him to slip away unnoticed. What I didn't anticipate was that he would choose our daughter's celebration as the backdrop for his announcement. Even after months of suspicion and preparation, that level of callousness caught me off guard. but in a way, it made what came next so much easier. My new apartment was minimalist and modern, nothing like the traditional colonial home Gregory and I had shared for 26 years. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the Columbus skyline. The furniture was sleek and contemporary, and there wasn't a single floral print or antique in sight. This place represented the new Teresa, someone I was still getting to know. I silenced my phone after Gregory's 7th call and poured myself a glass of the expensive Cabernet I'd purchased with my new credit card. As I sipped, I savored not just the wine, but the silence, and the knowledge that I had finally taken control. The next morning, reality set in. Jennifer called, her voice thick with tears. "Mom, what's happening?" "Dad came back to the shower after you left, but he wouldn't explain anything." Everyone was asking questions. It was humiliating. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," I said. "This isn't how I wanted things to go. Are you okay? Is the baby okay?" "We're fine," she said. "But Mom, Dad says you've taken everything. He says you've been planning this, that you emptied accounts without telling him. Is that true?" I closed my eyes, feeling a pang of guilt. Not for what I'd done, but for how it affected our children. "Jennifer, your father and I need to work through some things. I've protected what's rightfully mine after 38 years of marriage. That's all you need to know right now." "But the baby shower. Why didn't you tell me something was wrong?" "Because it wasn't about me. It was about you and my grandchild. I never imagined your father would choose that moment to announce his decision." After promising to visit her later that week, I hung up and steeled myself for the next call. It came from William, our son. "Mom, what the hell is going on? Dad's completely losing it." He showed up at my hotel room at midnight, ranting about how you've stolen his retirement. "William, please watch your language," I said automatically, the school librarian in me emerging despite everything. "Your father is upset because he's facing consequences he didn't anticipate." "What consequences?" "Mom, he said you transferred the lake house to yourself. That's cold." I felt a flash of anger. Cold? What would you call announcing to our entire social circle that you're leaving your wife for another woman during your pregnant daughter's baby shower? There was a long pause. "Wait, what? Dad didn't tell me that part." Of course he hadn't. Gregory had always been selective with information, a trait I was now employing myself. I spent the rest of the day fielding calls and texts from concerned friends and family. Some were appalled by Gregory's behavior. Others were shocked by my financial maneuvers. Dorothy, my closest friend since our teaching days, came over with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of champagne. "To your liberation," she toasted, raising her glass. "I've been waiting 30 years for you to stand up to that pompous ass." I laughed despite myself. "Have you really disliked him all this time?" Dorothy's expression softened. "I never disliked Gregory. I disliked how he diminished you. How he made every decision, controlled every dollar, took credit for your successes, and blamed you for his failures. You deserve better, Teresa." As we ate lo mein straight from the containers, I filled Dorothy in on my plans. I would be meeting with my lawyer again tomorrow. Gregory had already contacted his own attorney. The battle lines were being drawn. "Are you scared?" Dorothy asked as she was leaving. I considered the question. Not scared. Sad, yes. Angry, definitely. But for the first time in decades, I feel powerful. That night I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I arrived at Elizabeth's office downtown to find her waiting with a grave expression. "Gregory's attorney has been in touch," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "They're contesting the property transfer and claiming you acted in bad faith." "Is that going to be a problem?" I asked, my confidence faltering slightly. "It complicates things, but we've done nothing illegal. Everything was properly documented and filed. The lake house was transferred through legitimate channels." She pulled out a folder. "However, they're demanding an emergency hearing for temporary financial orders. Gregory is claiming financial hardship." I nearly choked. Financial hardship? The man makes over $300,000 a year. "Yes, but according to his filing, he has significant debt obligations I don't think you were aware of." Elizabeth spread several documents across her desk. Credit card statements showing balances in the tens of thousands. A personal loan with a staggering interest rate. A second mortgage on our primary residence that I had never signed for. "How is this possible?" I whispered, my hands shaking as I examined the evidence of yet another betrayal. "There's more," Elizabeth said gently. "The girlfriend, Angela Blackwood, she's a former client of Gregory's firm. There's been an ethics investigation ongoing for nearly 6 months. The pieces suddenly fell into place. Gregory's increasingly erratic behavior, his insistence that retirement was still years away, despite our original plan to retire together when I did. The frequent arguments about money that seemed to come out of nowhere. He's been hiding financial problems, I realized aloud. All this time, while making me believe he was the expert. It appears so, Elizabeth confirmed. And there's something else you should know. The firm is considering termination due to the inappropriate relationship with a client. If they find evidence he mismanaged her finances, he could lose his license, I finished. For a moment, I felt a wave of vindication, quickly followed by a cold realization. If Gregory lost his income and professional standing, it could impact the settlement I would receive in the divorce. "What does this mean for me?" I asked. "It means we need to adjust our strategy," Elizabeth said. "The good news is that you've already secured significant assets. The bad news is that there may be less to divide than we initially thought." As I left Elizabeth's office, I noticed a familiar car parked across the street, Gregory's black BMW. He stepped out as I approached my vehicle. "Teresa," he called, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "We need to talk." I hesitated, then turned to face him. He looked terrible. Unshaven, eyes bloodshot, wearing the same clothes from the baby shower. "About what, Gregory? Your girlfriend? Your secret debt? The ethics investigation at your firm?" His face paled. "How did you—" "I know everything now," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "All the things you kept from me because finances were too complicated for my understanding." "You don't understand," he insisted, stepping closer. "Angela isn't what you think. This whole situation isn't what you think." "Then explain it to me," I challenged. "Explain why you humiliated our daughter at her baby shower. Explain why you took out a second mortgage without my knowledge. Explain why you've been lying to me for months, maybe years." Instead of answering, Gregory's expression hardened. "You'll regret what you've done, Teresa. I built everything we have. Everything. You wouldn't even know how to manage these assets without me." I smiled, a genuine smile that seemed to unnerve him. "That's where you're wrong. I've learned quite a lot recently. I suggest you talk to your lawyer about a settlement because, from where I'm standing, I'm holding all the cards. 3 days after my confrontation with Gregory in the parking lot, I received an unexpected visitor at my apartment. The concierge called to announce that an Angela Blackwood was requesting to see me. I considered refusing, but curiosity won out. "Send her up," I told him. Minutes later, I was face to face with the woman who had waved so awkwardly at our daughter's baby shower. She was younger than me, probably in her early 30s, but not the 20-something trophy I had imagined. She wore a conservative pantsuit and minimal makeup, looking more like a business professional than a homewrecker. "Mrs. Callahan," she began, her voice tight. "Thank you for seeing me. I assume you have something important to say," I replied, not inviting her to sit. Angela took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something about Gregory. Something you deserve to know." Against my better judgment, I gestured to the couch. She perched on the edge, clutching her handbag like a shield. "I'm not having an affair with your husband," she stated flatly. "I never was." I laughed, a sharp sound without humor. "You'll forgive me if I don't believe you. You were at my daughter's baby shower, waving when my husband announced he was leaving me for someone who truly appreciates him." "I was there because Gregory insisted," she said. "He told me it was a business brunch. I had no idea it was a family event until I arrived, and by then it was too awkward to leave." Something in her expression made me pause. "Then why the announcement? Why the wave?" Angela's eyes filled with tears. "Because Gregory has been manipulating both of us. I'm not his girlfriend. I'm his victim." For the next hour, Angela told me a story that shook the foundations of everything I thought I knew. She had been Gregory's client at the investment firm, a young widow who inherited a substantial sum after her husband's death. Gregory had been assigned to manage her portfolio, but over time, he began making unauthorized investments, taking excessive fees, and eventually diverting funds to cover his own mounting debts. "When I discovered what he'd done, I threatened to report him," Angela explained. "That's when the manipulation started. He convinced me that no one would believe me, that he could make it look like I had authorized everything. He said he had connections that could ruin me professionally." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, still skeptical but increasingly disturbed. "Because yesterday, I finally went to the firm's ethics board with proof of what he did. They've launched a formal investigation. Gregory called me last night, threatening me again, and mentioned that you had stolen his money. That's when I realized you might be in danger too." She reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. "This contains copies of all the documentation, altered statements, forged authorizations, everything. I thought you should have it for your divorce proceedings." After Angela left, I sat stunned in my living room, the flash drive heavy in my palm. I didn't know whether to believe her story, but I knew someone who could help me verify it. I called Valerie, my financial advisor, and arranged to meet her immediately. After reviewing the documents on the drive, she confirmed what Angela had told me. "This is serious, Teresa," Valerie said grimly. "These aren't just ethical violations, they're potentially criminal." I felt sick. The man I had married, the father of my children, hadn't just betrayed me with another woman. He had committed fraud and potentially ruined lives. And now I had evidence that could send him to prison. That night, as I stared at the city lights from my window, I faced the most difficult decision of my life. What would I do with this information? The following week unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. Gregory's firm placed him on administrative leave pending their investigation. Our divorce proceedings were temporarily stalled as both legal teams processed the new information. Jennifer was hospitalized briefly with stress-induced high blood pressure, putting her at risk for complications with the pregnancy. William flew back to Columbus from Portland, determined to fix things between his parents before the baby arrived. Through it all, I maintained a determined calm, even as I grappled with what to do about Angela's evidence. "You have a powerful bargaining chip," Elizabeth advised during our latest meeting. "We could use this to negotiate a very favorable settlement." "Or I could turn everything over to the authorities," I countered. "Let Gregory face the legal consequences of his actions." Elizabeth's expression was neutral. "That's certainly an option, but consider how a public scandal and potential criminal case would affect your children, your grandchild, and ultimately, your own financial security." I knew she was right. If Gregory went to prison, there would be no alimony, potentially reduced assets to divide, and a stigma that would affect our entire family. Yet the thought of allowing him to escape accountability for his actions burned within me. The decision was made for me when Angela called again. "I've been contacted by 2 more of Gregory's former clients," she said. "They've noticed discrepancies in their accounts, too. The firm's internal investigation is expanding." My path became clear. I didn't need to be the one to bring Gregory down. His own actions were already doing that. What I needed was to protect myself, my children, and yes, even Angela and the other victims. I scheduled an emergency meeting with Elizabeth and came with specific demands for our counteroffer to Gregory's settlement proposal. Full ownership of both properties, 70% of all investment accounts, a lump sum alimony payment rather than monthly support, and most importantly, a complete separation from any liability related to Gregory's professional misconduct. "He'll never agree to this," Elizabeth warned. "He will," I said confidently, "because I'm offering him something in return. My silence." The settlement meeting was held in a conference room at Elizabeth's law firm. Gregory arrived with his attorney, a sharp-suited man with an aggressive reputation. I was surprised to see how much Gregory had aged in just 2 weeks. Deep lines etched his face, and his hair seemed grayer. "Mrs. Callahan has reviewed your proposal and has a counteroffer," Elizabeth began, sliding folders across the table. Gregory's attorney skimmed the documents, his eyebrows rising. "This is completely unreasonable," he declared. "Is it?" I asked, speaking directly to Gregory. "Considering what I know about your professional situation, I think it's quite generous." Gregory's face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" "Angela Blackwood came to see me," I said quietly. "She shared some very interesting documentation about your investment practices." "You're bluffing," Gregory's attorney interjected. I turned to Elizabeth, who nodded and produced a thumb drive. "This contains copies of everything we have," she said. "We haven't shared this information with authorities yet, but rest assured, we will if necessary." Gregory and his attorney stepped outside to confer. I could see them through the glass wall of the conference room. Gregory gesticulating wildly, his attorney speaking in urgent, hushed tones. When they returned, Gregory's surrender was evident in his posture. "We'll accept the terms," his attorney announced stiffly, "with one modification. My client requests ongoing visitation rights with his future grandchild." I felt a twinge of unexpected emotion. Despite everything, Gregory was still a father and soon-to-be grandfather. That was something even I wouldn't take away from him. "Agreed," I said, "provided he completes an ethics course and financial counseling." Gregory looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Why would you stipulate that?" "Because our grandchild deserves a grandfather who understands right from wrong," I replied simply. "Something you seem to have forgotten along the way." 2 hours later, with papers signed and notarized, my 38-year marriage was effectively over. The day Jennifer gave birth to Eliza Grace, Gregory and I sat on opposite sides of the hospital room. Our new reality crystallized in the awkward silence between us. But when our daughter placed that tiny bundle in my arms, nothing else mattered. I was a grandmother now, embarking on yet another new chapter in my life. In the months that followed, Gregory's professional world collapsed completely. The firm's investigation expanded to include regulatory authorities, and while he avoided criminal charges through a cooperation agreement, his career in financial services was permanently ended. He moved to a small apartment across town, started therapy, and began the humbling process of rebuilding his life from scratch. As for me, I sold our family home and moved permanently into my apartment. I traveled to places I'd always wanted to see: the Grand Canyon, New York City, even a 2-week tour of Italy. I volunteered at the library where I'd once worked, reading to children twice a week. And slowly, carefully, I began to repair the relationships damaged by Gregory's betrayal and my own necessary but painful response. "You know," Dorothy said one evening as we shared dinner on my balcony, "you've completely transformed this past year. You're not the same Teresa I've known for decades." I considered this as I looked out at the Columbus skyline, golden in the setting sun. "I'm exactly the same person," I corrected gently. I just finally allowed her to emerge. Looking back on my journey from betrayal to empowerment, I realized the greatest revenge wasn't in the assets I secured or the dignity I maintained. It was in discovering I had been capable of rescuing myself all along.